The chill that coiled through the corridors of the Red Keep had never suited Samwell Tarley, yet in the hush before dawn he found it curiously bracing. Candles guttered in their sconces, casting ripples of saffron over vellum scrolls piled like fallen leaves upon the council table. He stood alone, quill poised but unsullied, as though the very ink feared to mar the magnitude of what must be written. High above, ravens shifted on their perches, restless wings scattering flecks of dust that glimmered in the lamplight like winter's first snow. Sam drew a deliberate breath. Even after moons of wearing the Grand Maester's heavy-linked chain, he still expected someone. Randall's booming voice, or the rasp of old Archmaester Ebro's, to declare him unworthy, to strip the links from his broad shoulders and banish him back to the quiet anonymity of Old Town's halls. Yet no censure came. The keep remained still, as though Benton Blackwood's long-case clock, ticking in the corner, alone remembered the passage of time. He touched the iron link that spoke of the mysteries of war, forged by his own hand beneath the citadel's white flames. It was cold, despite the warmth of the room, a constant reminder that knowledge and blood were bound by the same iron law. Both weighed heavily, both demanded to be born. Tonight, he would write the first words of a charter that might unmoor centuries of tradition. He knew the enormity of it, felt it stretch in the ache between his ribs where fear dwelled cheek by jowl with hope. Outside, King's Landing slumbered in uneasy peace. Ash from dragonfire still darkened the crevices of cobblestones. Half-built walls rose where war had bitten them down. Yet Smith's forges glowed again, and the hucksters' songs drifted up from the black water on gusts of brine. A new reign had begun, promising better things, but Sam understood promises were as fragile as quills. Too much pressure, and they snapped. He dipped the nib into the inkwell bran the Broken had gifted him, carved from heart oak that had once whispered in the godswood of Winterfell. Sap-scented memories flooded him. Joan's quiet laughter, Gilly's smile in the candlelight of Castle Black, little Sam clutching his fur mittens. All of them were threads woven through his resolve. If he faltered, what future might they inherit? The parchment crackled beneath his hand, yet he hesitated. A Grand Maester's first decree could not be undone by mere apology. It would ripple outward, shaping law, custom, the very bones of the realm. He exhaled, allowed the scratching of Raven's talons above to steady him, and began. By quill and crown, by council and commons, let it be known. The words flowed, measured and clear, forming pillars upon which a more merciful kingdom might stand. He wrote of food stores and taxation made fair, of a royal hospice for war widows and children fathered by ghosts who would never return, of a library open to all, not simply high-born scions cloistered in marble towers. He framed each line with cautious deference to tradition, but seasoned spiced with a daring that might have startled the cobwebbed minds of Old Town's conclave. Hours passed like sighs. Dawn bled rose gold through the lattice windows, painting runnels across Sam's ink-stained fingers. He slipped the quill aside, rubbed aching joints, and allowed himself a moment's gaze over the city. Smoke curled from bakeries. Ferrymen shouted greetings along the quay, and somewhere bells pealed a melody half-remembered from his youth in Horn Hill. In this fragile hush between dark and day, he believed change truly possible. But belief alone is a flickering candle. Sam knew the realm's lords, grizzled survivors of wars too numerous, would balk. They would whisper of precedent, of birthright, perhaps even of the young Grand Maester's northborn king, spun by rumor into some arcane puppet master. So he prepared. He drafted addenda citing histories older than Aegon's conquest, laws carved in runes upon fallen towers in the Vale, and experiments recorded in Sotherios where healers mixed treacle with crushed willow bark to ease a fever's fury. He summoned diagrams of aqueducts designed by vanished Royner engineers to carry clean water from mountain springs to city wells. He penned a meticulous treatise on grain distribution, tracking yields across reach fields now lying fallow from fires and conscriptions. And when at last his vision took the shape of a leather-bound tome too large for any pocketed dismissal, he sealed it with red wax bearing the stag and lion of Baratheon and Lannister entwined, the sigil of little Tommen, whose short reign had taught Sam the price of innocence unaided by wisdom. The seal was not meant to evoke mourning alone. It was meant to remind. Children inherited what their elders wrought. Footsteps approached, soft but certain. Lord Davos Seaworth, Hand of the King, entered with a sea-borne breeze clinging to his cloak. Gray hair curled damp against his temples, and in his scarred fingers he carried a stack of letters bound by twine. "You've not slept," Davos observed, voice low as a lapping tide. "I've slept less for far smaller things," Sam replied, and dared a small smile. "When Stannis held the wall, we stayed awake 3 nights, patching rags into cloaks so men wouldn't freeze." He gestured to the tome. "This may keep more alive than cloaks ever did." Davos thumbed the wax seal but did not break it. "His grace rises with the sun. The council meets at first bell. Will you present this then?" "I will." He pressed palms to tabletop to steady himself. "But words on parchment are wind without allies. I'll need voices, yours, Sir Davos, Lady Sansa's, perhaps even Queen Asha's and Pike." He hesitated, recalling the Greyjoy captain's sharp laughter and sharper axe, wondering if the Ironborn understood peace the way landbound folk did. "I will ask them to see beyond banners." Davos' eyes, sea-green and sorrow-wise, softened. "You speak of banners as if they were walls." "Aye, so they are. Yet a wall can be climbed if enough hands lift together." He set the letters down. "These are replies from former Maester Malros in Highgarden, and from Lady Margaery's cousin Lionette. They're favorable, cautiously so. Folk want healing, Samwell. They'll follow a man who shows them how." Sam touched the iron link again. "Healing, poet." It began with truth, exposed, wounds cleansed, poultices applied though they sting. He would draft a decree opening the Red Keep's vaults of wildfire, documenting their stores so no tyrant might one day scour city and soul alike. He would petition the faith to send Septus to every holdfast whose sons had bled out on trampled fields, offering solace without sermon on obedience. And he would write of ravens, not merely as carriers but as symbols, black-winged threads binding holdfast to Old Town, mountain to marsh, man to man. A flutter overhead drew his gaze. One raven, darker than the rest, hopped along its perch, head tilted, as though already heeding the call of distant skies. Sam unlatched the cage door and the bird alighted upon his wrist, claws gentle on sleeve. Its eyes, twin pools of midnight, reflected his own face, plump, careworn, yet kindled anew by purpose. "Fly to Winterfell," he murmured, fastening a narrow scroll to its leg. "Mere greeting, no secrets yet. Tell the Lady of the North that spring seeds are ready for her frozen fields." He lifted his hand. The raven beat its wings, stirred the candle flames, and vanished through the open lattice into the coming day. Bran the Broken sat in his wheeled chair beneath the throne room's shattered dragon skull. Shafts of colored light spilled through stained glass panels depicting the Seven. The one above Bran's head cast a circlet of amethyst over his brow, as though the glass itself crowned him. Sam, tome in arms, approached across cracked marble. The echoes of his boots rang like distant bells. The small council gathered in a half-circle. Davos, Sir Brienne, glittering in polished white steel, Sir Podrick Payne, taller now, the sword of the Kingsguard, Sir Gendry Baratheon of Storm's End, sinew and smolder, and Tyrion Lannister, Lord of Casterly Rock, silver-streaked hair framing mismatched eyes heavy with 1,000 reckonings. Sam halted before the Iron Throne's silent ruin, its melted blades twisted into grotesque petals by dragon flame, and bowed. Raven ink shadowed the hollows beneath his eyes, yet his voice carried. "Your Grace, Lords and Ladies of the Council, I present a treatise on the future of the realm, being a charter for reconstruction, relief, and the common good." He held the tome out. The weight nested in Bran's lap, heavy but steady. Bran's pale fingers traced the cover's ridges. "The common good," the king repeated softly, as though tasting the phrase. "An uncommon notion in these halls, yet a necessary one." Tyrion cleared his throat. "Grand Maester, custom dictates we peruse reforms piecemeal, line by line, clause by clause. Why bring all at once?" Sam met the imp's sharp gaze. Because the realm bleeds from 1,000 cuts, my lord. A single salve will not suffice when rot seeps to the bone. Gendry leaned on his warhammer's haft like a shore against waves. Hammer fits iron with force, but iron still must cool. He lifted thick shoulders. Let's read. No forged temper without heat. Brienne nodded assent. Davos unfurled the tome, pages whispering. For a time, only turning parchment sounded, interwoven with the thrum of Bran's slow breath. Candles burned low. As they read, Sam watched faces shift, the flare of intrigue in Brienne's eyes upon proposals for orphan squire paid ships, the thinning of Tyrion's mouth at references to tax exemptions for small folk, the twitch of Bran's fingers during mention of archiving arcane histories, long lost to winter's snows. At last Tyrion closed the book. Ambitious, he pronounced, like a maester diagnosing fever. Some will call it madness, others revolution. Words, Davos said quietly. Good words. Brienne stood straighter, plates clinking. I have walked too many battlefields strewn with innocence. If coin can mend what swords have severed, then coin we must end. Gendry grunted. Storm's End can spare grain, even coin. But lords will demand boons in return. Land, titles. Sam's stomach fluttered. Titles are but words in parchment, sir. Let the boons be roads, bridges, clean cisterns, so mothers need not walk miles for water. Tyrion's eyes glinted. Convince them a new road fattens purses faster than old tolls, and they'll line up their signatures. Bran placed the tome on the oaken table. Grand Maester, begin with quills and ravens. Summon the princes of Dorne, the ladies of Highgarden, the lordlings clinging to crumbling towers in the Vale. Invite them to speak here, to see these pages for themselves. Sam bowed once more. Relief unfurled a fragile wing in his chest, yet he tempered it. One assent did not build a kingdom. Still, the first stone had been set. That night he returned to his chambers overlooking Blackwater Bay. Gilly awaited him there, rocking little Sam by the hearth. The boy, no longer babe yet not quite squire, slept draped across her lap, cheeks flushed warm. Gilly's smile ignited something deeper than any maester's link. You're tired, she whispered. So are you, he replied, kneeling beside them. But look at him, dreaming he rides dragons, no doubt. She brushed curls from their son's brow. He dreams of lemon cakes and a cat with green eyes. Sam laughed softly. Better than dragons. Dragons burn cities. Yet his mirth faltered. Gilly, this charter, some will hate me for it. They'll whisper of a steward's bastard lover guiding the realm's quill. Her eyes, ice blue and steadfast, pinned his doubt. Your quill is guided by what's right. Let them whisper. Wind does not rouse mountains. Nezero. He kissed her knuckles. There will be journeys. Assemblies in Sunspear and Gulltown. I'll ride north again, perhaps to White Harbor. Then we'll ride with you, she said simply. I've crossed worse roads. He thought of the path from Craster's Keep to Castle Black. Snow thick as sin, hunger gnawing every step. She had not faltered then. She would not now. He rested his forehead against hers, grateful beyond measure. Outside, gulls screeched, and the moon cast a silver path across black waters. Somewhere far below, fishermen hauled nets heavy with herring, a promise of sustenance. Samwell Tarly, once the coward son of Hornhill, now Grand Maester, closed his eyes and dared to imagine nets of a different sort, wide enough to catch the hearts of lords and small folk alike, binding them not in chains, but in common cause. Storms gathered come midsummer. Letters returned with wax unbroken. Ravens sent back blind. Lord Paramount Grafton of the Vale questioned the need for a library, when septons educate as the seven ordain. Lady Dustin of Barrowton snarled that the crown might mend the Dreadfort before meddling south of Moat Cailin. Even in the Reach, now green and gentle again, whispers rose of Old Town's archmaesters petitioning to recall Sam's chain, claiming he had overstepped the bounds of scholarly neutrality. In the council chamber, Tyrion tossed one such scroll onto the table, its wax seal sundering like brittle bark. Guy. They fear you, he told Sam, not unkindly. And fear is a stew that overboils without spice to cool it. Sam's shoulders sagged. I reasoned with them, cited history, offered compromises. Brienne's gauntlet closed over his forearm. Compromise to bullies is blood in the water. Show them steel. Davos stroked his beard. Not swords, truth. Send them proof the charter benefits their people for their purses. Grain shipments to Vale ports. Maesters trained in healing to the Baraton. When their folk prosper, they'll rethink. But shipments require coin, Tyrion mused, pacing. We levy tax, and they howl. We ask voluntary tithes, and they smirk. Euron's fleet lies broken, yet ironborn raiders still harry merchants. Trade sputters. Man. Bran's voice, calm as winter wind, halted the debate. We look outward too much. Westeros is one body. A wound festers if the hand denies it. Samwell, write not to the lords, write to their stewards, their septons, their innkeepers. Knowledge seeps beneath doors a crown cannot breach. Sam's heart pounded. Pamphlets, your grace? Yes, Bran said, eyes distant. Simple words for simple folk. Tell them of wells dug in Fleabottom, of plague wards in Lannisport, of fields in the Reach richer for rotating crops, not raising them. Let small folk carry the charter in gossip and song. Tyrion's grin bloomed. Revolution, my rumor. I dare say Varys would tremble in his grave. And so Sam wrote again, but this time, not in high Valyrian flourish. He penned tales. The cobbler of Maidenpool whose daughter lived because clean water spared her pox. The smith of Fair Isle whose sons returned to school after grain levies lowered their bread's price. He wrote ballads, riddles, dialogues between raven and rat, debating the virtues of a shared granary. He sealed them with a sigil of quill, crossed with sheaf of wheat, no crown, no lion or dragon. An emblem any man might claim. Ravens took wing. Roadside singers found new verses. Children chalked quills and wheat upon alley walls. And in the smoky back rooms of taverns, men argued not of which lord held whose hostage, but of whether lime mortar truly kept wells sweet, as Samwell's writings claimed. The realm leaned, curious. Yet not all eyes regarded him with wonder. In Old Town, Archmaester Valar, a gaunt man whose chain bore more gold than sense, summoned a secret convocation. Tomes the color of dried blood lay open before them. They spoke of doctrine, orthodoxy, and the danger of populist learning. Quills scratched, signatures bled across parchment, and a sealed raven departed beneath moonless dark, bound for a man who still wore a stag upon his breast, though the stag's true line had ended in fire and seawater. Rumor reached King's Landing days later. Lord Jared Ambrose of Crakehall amassed sellswords, citing Bran's northern puppetry and Sam's wildling lover as proof the crown had fallen to heresy. Within a fortnight, horn blasts echoed across the Reach. A banner of red ox upon white field rode beside the golden rose. Yet the rose was inverted, petals black as pitch. Discontent blossomed deadly. Sam stood upon Maegor's holdfast rampart at sunset, watchfires flaring across the city walls. He should have felt despair. Instead, iron resolve settled. He had not bled on the fist of the first men, had not watched friends die at Hardhome, had not ridden through the ash of King's Landing to Shirknow. Beside him, Sir Podrick adjusted the fit of his white cloak. "We'll hold," the young knight promised. "Let them come. The King's Guard has faced worse. We must prevent bloodshed." Sam replied, "Words built this storm. Perhaps words may calm it. And if they do not..." Podrick's hand rested on his longsword. Sam looked to the horizon where distant torches winked like angry stars. "Then we show them what future they forsake." Letters flew once more, pleading for parley. Lord Ambrose ignored them. So the Grand Maester turned to a different ally, the Citadel's own libraries. He drafted treatises revealing hidden debts owed by Crakehall to Braavosi bankers, evidence of crop blight worsened by excessive levies. He exposed Lord Valar's investments in Dornish wine, taxed at triple the rate small folk paid for bread. Then he delivered the documents, not to lords, but to millers, smiths, market wives, whose purses felt those levies. Angry murmurs churned up the Rose Road quicker than mounted outriders. When Lord Ambrose reached Bitterbridge, expecting cheering banners, he found gates barred. Commoners lined ramparts, waving Sam's pamphlets. Their chant carried over moats. Bread before brooms. Grain before gold. Faced with a siege by his own people, Lord Ambrose hesitated. Ravens sought terms. Sam, upon Bran's counsel, offered amnesty and inclusion in the Charter's first public council. Humiliation tasted better than starvation. Ambrose accepted. Thus, the first Assembly of Commons convened in King's Landing's great sept, its rebuilt dome gleaming crystalline under midday sun. Seats carved from oak, not marble, filled the nave. Barbers, fishwives, brewers, former soldiers missing limbs, all bore tokens signifying crafts. Iron nails, stalks of barley, spools of dyed thread. The lords watched from balconies, uneasy. Samwell took no throne. He stood at a plain lectern, chain gleaming, and spoke of rivers, how each stream by itself might be bridged or dammed, but confluence commanded respect. He called the realm such a river. Then he opened the floor, not to lords first, but to a baker from Crackclaw Point, who described hunger's hollow echo. A septa from Dorne recited names of plague-struck children. A maester from the citadel's mid-ranks offered designs for wind-powered mills, harnessing storm gales along the narrow sea. Hours stretched. No swords were drawn. By dusk, a charter once whispered became promise spoken aloud in the tongues of 100 provinces. Bran signed new writs granting small folk councils in every region. Their votes counted toward taxation and distribution. Tyrion, ever pragmatic, negotiated trade concessions, ensuring Lady Dustin's woolen exports, reached Ruby Ford unmolested. Even Lord Valar, faced with expose and ire, recanted his dissent in a letter praising the Citadel's tradition of enlightenment. Sam returned to his chamber that night, every muscle trembling, not with exhaustion, but exhilaration. Gilly waited, eyes shining. Little Sam clutched a wooden quill carved by Davos, pretending to scribble upon a slate. "What did you write, sweetling?" Sam asked, kneeling. The boy frowned in concentration. "Story," he lisped. "About people sharing bread." Sam's throat tightened. He gathered his family close and whispered, "That's the best story of all." Yet stories do not end. They grow, branch, demand tending. Across narrow sea, exiled merchants of Volantis eyed Westeros rising stability with envy. Iron-born captains bereft of plunder weighed return to their old ways. And in the north, rumors trickled of a splinter sect, proclaiming the old gods displeased by southern meddling. Sam read each raven with calm determination. The charter would adapt, as trees bend to wind. He convened study circles. Knights debating maesters on fortification redesigns that spared ancient groves. Smiths partnering with alchemists to repurpose wildfire into controlled kiln heat for bricks. Midwives trading knowledge with water dancers of bravos on easing childbirth through breath and movement. From these circles emerged innovations. Canal locks along the Tumblestone, glass-pane greenhouses heating Winter Town, and a network of beacon towers stretching from the Arbor to Eastwatch by the sea, communicating through mirrored sun flashes by day and colored lanterns by night. Ravens still flew, but light, swift as thought, now threaded the land. Years unfolded. Sam's hair silvered at the temples, yet his step lost none of its purpose. He wrote volumes. The Commonwealth of Isles, treatise on practical herblore, on the education of all children, regardless of birth. Each found its way into the saddlebags of merchants, the satchels of shepherds. There were setbacks. A crop blight in the Crown lands, an outbreak of flux in Gulltown, the assassination of a reformist lord by conspirators who believed coin more sacred than mercy. Yet each time the Charter's advocates, common and highborn alike, rallied. They sent grain, healers, justice. Breath by breath, the realm remembered its own humanity. One winter's eve, standing atop the rebuilt Tower of the Hand, Sam watched snowflakes settle on the parapet. King Bran, his face lined by seasons, yet eyes bright with quiet wonder, rolled forward in his chair. "You feared you might fail," Bran said, voice carrying above the hush of falling snow. "I still do," Sam admitted. "Every day." "Then you will not," Bran replied. "Only those who forget fear invite folly." Below them, the city glowed, a constellation of hearth fires, glass lanterns, and mirrored beacons winking messages across rooftops. Somewhere, bells chimed midnight. Sam closed his eyes and listened. The sound was not triumph, nor finality. It was becoming. A realm reshaping its own bones, guided by ink and intention. He recalled Maester Aemon's frail voice atop the wall. "Love is the death of duty." Sam now believed duty, rightly tended, could be love's truest form. He opened his eyes as a raven swept by, feathered wings scattering snowflakes into swirling fragments of light. Far below, children skated upon a frozen fountain, laughter rising like hymns. Gilly would be waiting by the hearth, and little Sam, no longer so little, would ask again about dragons. He would tell his son of creatures powerful enough to burn cities, yet leashed by riders who sometimes forgot the cost. He would tell him dragons could also guard, ferrying seeds across continents on the wind. He would tell him the realm was their dragon now, vast and perilous, and that quills were rains of fire and hope intertwined. Samwell Tarly, Grand Maester of Westeros, turned from the parapet and descended the stair, quill ready once more to carve the next chapter. Behind him, snow ceased, and dawn's first pale ribbons unspooled across the sky. "Oh, hi. Oh, me." Moonlight poured over the silent length of the Roserad, rendering every frost-edged blade of grass a sliver of quicksilver. The royal procession had halted for the night at a ruined watchtower, once raised by House Rowan in some forgotten skirmish. Only 3 walls and half a stair survived, but the crumbled stones formed a natural windbreak, and the ground within lay level enough for tents. A small fire sputtered under an iron cauldron that smelled of carrot tops, barley, and peppery ham. Samwell Tarly sat upon a barrel beside the flames, knees drawn up, a leather-wrapped folio balanced across them like a minstrel's harp. He traced the parchment within, feeling the slightly ridged strokes of ink beneath his fingertips. The folio held draft charters for 3 new Ludus houses, small-hold estates to be granted to common-born veterans maimed in the last wars. Each estate comprised a dozen moss-soft fields, a stone longhall, and the sworn right to sit in quarter-year councils held at Harvest Hall, where lords and small folk now mixed over grain tallies and irrigation maps instead of tithes and tribute. The parchment margins brimmed with Davos Seaworth's tight, weather-scarred scrawl. Suggestions to add fishing coves for those who had lost arms yet could cast nets with their knees and teeth, or rights of way across lordly orchards so a man who limped might cart his produce without paying a toll. Sam smiled, warmed as much by friendship as by the fire. Rustling footsteps announced Sir Brienne's approach. She emerged from the shimmer of moonlit grass, her white cloak ghost-soft, helm tucked beneath one arm. "Grand Maester," she greeted, setting a wineskin at his feet. "You've not broken fast since dawn." Sam lifted the skin stopper. Honey wine kissed his palate, tart with apple peel. "Lord Crane sent this from Red Lake," Brienne went on, leaning her greatsword against the barrel. "A gift in thanks for the coracles you ordered for his riverfolk. He says drownings fell to near nothing once children learned to paddle instead of tumble off banks." Sam coughed softly at the tickle of cinnamon in the wine. His thanks should go to the stonemasons who shaped the boat launches. "I only pushed a quill." She sat opposite, plating stew into a wooden trencher. "Never belittle the quill," she chided gently. "A sword may sever an enemy, but a quill severs generations from want." He accepted the trencher, breathing steam. "I try to remember," he said. "Yet quills can spill blood, too. Half the realm still calls me thief of old ways." Brienne's blue eyes flicked to the tent where Tyrion's lantern glowed. Old ways kept bastards starving and daughters silent. Let them howl. Wolves howl at any moon, but still the moon climbs. Sam chuckled at the image. They ate in companionable hush, listening to the wind hum through broken archways. Somewhere within the tangle of their makeshift camp, Podrick's tenor rose in a bawdy song about a Dornish girl and a jug of orange wine. A scattering of guardsmen joined in, clapping the slow night toward comfort. When the trencher lay empty, and the folio finished, Sam stretched aching legs and lifted his gaze to the splintered stair that jutted skyward. On impulse he gathered quill and lamp and climbed. Loose stones shifted beneath each step, but Brienne followed, steady as dawn. At the half-landing, the ruin opened into air, presenting a view of valleys silvered beneath the waxing moon. Low fog crawled leafless orchards, turned every stream to a serpentine mirror. Lanterns winked where outriders patrolled the road, and beyond, on a distant hill, a beacon tower flickered red, amber, green in quick succession. Code for clear weather. Safe passage, no raiders. Brienne rested mailed elbows atop the crumbling parapet. Hard to remember the fires, she murmured. When night is so gentle. Sam laid the folio on the stone and weighed a reply. The fires she meant were the dragon fires that had consumed King's Landing, and the wildfire caches that had threatened to drown the realm in green apocalypse. He remembered the small folk screams, the ash flurry sticking in his beard. Gentle nights are the realm's apology, he answered. Ours is to keep them gentle. She smiled, but the smile curved small and sad. And if gentleness fails, Sam looked to the beacon. Then we light more towers and shine brighter. Below, a rider galloped in, hooves spraying frost. The sentry horns blew 2 long notes. Raven arriving. Brienne descended at once. Sam followed, breath clouding. The bird, hooded and hooded again for silence, waited on the sentry's arm. Its seal bore a branch of lightning-shaped runes, Skagos. Sam's brows knitted. Skagos seldom sent ravens. The island's folk were goatskin-clad reavers who trusted horns and smoke more than letters. He cracked the seal. Maester. The parchment began in uneven runic common. The white bear walks again. 3 villages gone. We follow your beacon trick to send for aid. Ships of Eastwatch burned. Need sea grain and healers before winter. We will pay in obsidian and seal fur. Signed Iska, daughter of Iskrim, head of the 3 sisters. Sam's pulse surged. White bears, giant cousins of the northern snow bear, had been thought extinct since the long night. But the more urgent note was Eastwatch's burned ships. White bear raids rarely reached that far south. He turned to Brienne. We leave at first light. I must reach Old Town's lithographers by Raven tonight. Charts, supply manifests. He hesitated. Tell Tyrion we divert from Bitterbridge Council. Skagos must not starve. Brienne studied the message. The lords gathered at Bitterbridge will sulk. Let them. Sam's tone surprised even him. A starving island will not wait through their sulks. Brienne clasped his shoulder. We ride together. North or south, the realm is one body. That night Sam slept an hour at most. Dreams pulled him down corridors of ice, walls glimmering blue and slick. The wind echoed like distant drums, and in its pulse he heard rough Skagosi voices chanting. Then the crash of waves upon frozen cliffs. When the dream gave way to waking, he lay still a while, listening to Gilly's steady breathing across the tent, little Sam's small snores from a cot of furs, until a raven outside gave 3 sharp pecks. Dawn. They broke camp, swift as soldiers. Tyrion emerged bleary-eyed but acquiescent, already rearranging parchment priorities. Davos muttered oaths about sea routes and wind patterns, commandeering an outrider to gallop ahead to Maidenpool for ships. By sunrise, they were trotting along rime-crusted lanes, banners bundled to avoid notice, Brienne and Podrick on point, Sam riding between wagons, stacked with root vegetables bound for Bitterbridge, now redirected toward the docks of Duskendale. 2 days later, gulls wheeled over Duskendale's harbor. The tide slapped pilings in an uneasy cadence, as though the sea itself sensed urgency. Davos contacts produced 3 stout carracks and a swift galley already trimmed for rough northern waters. While sailors loaded casks of grain, Sam labored in the captain's cabin with ink and compass, mapping a route hugging the coast where beacon towers could relay warnings by light. He penned letters granting relief funds from the royal treasury, each sealed with Brand's triple-leaf sigil. By evening the fleet beat north under reefed topsails. Gilly stood astern, hair whipping, pointing out pods of orcas breaching in the glowing sunset. Little Sam squealed delight. The sight fixed itself in Samwell's heart as a vow. He would not allow northern seas to be ruled by fear again. The voyage proved uneventful through the Bight. But as they neared Skago's jagged silhouette, the island's black crags clawing at a slate sky, snow began to fall, heavy as wet sand. Waves lifted the carracks till even seasoned sailors paled. The galley led, torchline glowing through white haze, but soon the beacon tower at gray cliffs vanished in swirling flakes. Sam, wrapped in bearskin cloak, peered through a speaking trumpet toward the prow. A howl rolled over the water, not wind, a beast. The white bear. Sailors crossed themselves. Brienne joined Sam on deck, greatsword sheathed, but gauntleted hands flexing. She shouted above the gale, "These beasts swim leagues, if it takes the rudder." A crack like splitting oak rent the night. The galley ahead listed. Something colossal smashed through its port side, showering splinters. Men screamed. Brienne's sword rasped free. Sam felt absurd with nothing but quill and ravens at his belt. The beast surfaced, silver-pelted in the torch glow, eyes black pits, a wall of muscle and fur larger than any direwolf. It reared, claws slashing, toppled a mast. Archers loosed shafts that vanished in its coat. The galley's captain tossed a barrel of lamp oil, but cold waves snuffed the flames before they caught. Brienne bellowed for grappling lines. Sailors flung hooks, drawing the carrack alongside the crippled galley. She leapt the gap as casually as a child hopping puddles. Podrick followed, blade gleaming. Sam clutched the rail, mind racing. Fire would not kindle in this squall. Arrows merely angered the creature. He remembered readings in a yellowed Northman bestiary. White bears craved fat. The smell of rendered whale blubber drove them to frenzy. Whale blubber. The ship's tallow stores. He called for torches, barrels of tallow linen sails. Sailors eyed him as if he'd lost sense, yet obeyed. The chain about his neck carried weight. They soaked a sail in tallow, lashed it to an oar, and with flint struck flame at its end. Snow hissed, but the fat burned blue-orange, a guttering beacon. Sam waved the fiery oar like a banner, leaning far over the gunwale. The bear, mauling the galley's rigging, scented the smell, swung its massive head. For one heartbeat, Sam felt those abyssal eyes meet his own, a corridor opening into ancient midnight hunger. Then it lunged. The creature hit the water beside the carrack in a geyser. Men screamed to back oars, but Sam thrust the burning sail downward. Flame-licked fur. The bear snarled, rolling away. Brienne's voice roared orders from the shattered deck. "Lines here, all wounded." Sam forced the flaming lure further. The bear circled, maddened, then seized the sail in its jaws. Fire engulfed its muzzle. With a keening roar, it plunged beneath the waves and did not reappear. The zeech of burning fat faded. Snow hissed against embers. Silence settled but for sobs and creak of timbers. The galley listed, yet still floated. Brienne guided bleeding sailors onto the carrack, one by one, her white cloak sodden crimson at the hem. Dawn found them anchored in a narrow Skagosi cove, streaked with black stone spires. Smoke curled from crevices higher up. Villagers watching. Sam disembarked with Davos, hands raised, unarmed. Stiff-spined warriors in bone-sewn cloaks met them, axes glinting. But behind the warriors huddled women and children gaunt with hunger. Iska, daughter of Iskrim, strode forth. A tall, broad-shouldered woman whose left eye shone pale blue, the other milky blind, scarred by old claw. She examined Sam's chain, the sigils of raven and wheat device stitched on his cloak. "You got our raven," she said in a thick accent. "And brought grain, Maester healers, seed," Sam replied, gesturing to wagons rolling down the gangplanks. and treaties to trade obsidian for southern iron plowshares. Iska's gaze flicked to the surviving sailors. And the white bear. Sam exhaled steam. Drove it off fire-scarred but not dead. He held her eye. We'll hunt it together. Or study it. Study. Skepticism creased her brow. Sam explained his theory. If white bears returned after a century dead, something shifted in the far north. Perhaps melting of old glacier dens, or migrations of seals luring them south. Knowledge of that shift could spare more lives than swords. Iska listened, then nodded once. Bring your quills and bows. My people fight, but they will learn too. The weeks that followed became a tapestry of toil and discovery. Sam's healers built birch-bark leech tents to treat fevered fishers. Tyrion's quartermasters, arriving on a second fleet, traded lamp oil for obsidian daggers precise enough to carve mast hoops without splinter. Brienne drilled island youths in spear lines, teaching them to use cliff ledges as natural battlements. Gilly organized women into circles, weaving goat wool blankets dyed with moss pigments, bartered southward for salt and barley. Sam himself trekked the glacier barrens with Iska, recording bear tracks wider than helms, measuring seal colonies, noting new algae blooms under thawing ice. Each dusk, he wrote dispatches to Old Town's archivists. Temperature logs, salinity tests, sketches of bone ridges on bear skulls scholars had never seen. Knowledge, he told himself on wind-howled nights, was the true bulwark against the world's caprice. One moonless night, by the aurora's flicker, Sam and Iska found the white bear. It lay dying beside a crevasse, fur blackened where fire had bitten, ribs jutting like splintered spars. Its breath steamed weakly. Iska hefted her obsidian axe, but Sam touched her sleeve. Let it pass, he whispered. Its story is finished. They watched until the beast's flank stilled. Sam knelt, murmured a prayer he half remembered from the faith, but ended in the old tongue Iska used for her ancestors. She seemed startled, then lowered the axe in respect. Together, they took hide samples, teeth, bone shards, gifts for Maester lore. When they returned to the village, dawn kindled on the horizon. Children clustered around, eyes wide as the tusks Sam carried. He gave a tooth to little Sam, teaching him how to polish it with seal fat, until swirls of pale rose appeared in the ivory. In the boy's wonder, Sam glimpsed the next generation's hunger for curiosity. By spring thaw, Skagos icebound inlets churned with kurags, laden with barley seed. Beacon towers along the northern coast now flashed codes mastered by island scouts. Sam convened a summit beneath a tarpaulin hall. Skagosi chiefs, Eastwatch stewards, Carhold's new lady Alice Karstark, even a shy envoy from the thens beyond the wall. He spoke of shared waters, rescue packs, and a roaming fleet of healer rafts funded by crown grants. Iska rose and declared white bear claws would remain sheathed against any flagged vessel carrying Samwell's quill and wheat device. The oaths were sealed in brine and black blood mead, and Brienne's sword clanged in salute. News of the accord traveled south swifter than ravens. In taverns from White Harbor to Sunspear, bards wove verses of the Quillbear Pact, celebrating a maester who faced a monster with fire and reason. Some mocked, as always, yet copies of Sam's bear treatise sold faster than millers could grind rag paper. At Old Town, Archmaester Valar reluctantly stamped it with the copper mask signifying use to students of the living world. Sam returned to King's Landing aboard Davos' flagship, Shai-Maid II, a vessel built partially from the salvaged galley wreckage, her figurehead carved into a quill wrapped by a bear. The city greeted them with festival banners, wheat sheaf pennons, children wearing raven masks paper black. Bran received Sam in the Godswood courtyard, the weirwood in full spring leaf, red leaves fluttering like slow applause. You bent the world again, Bran observed, his gaze distant, seeing more than the courtyard. And it bent willingly. Sam sank onto a bench, bone-tired. Only a little. It's still stubborn. Lords at Bitterbridge passed a bartering tariff while we sailed north. They think the Commons Council emboldened smugglers. Bran nodded. Tariffs can be unmade. Starved islands cannot. Sam sheathed a yawn. Your Grace, I hope soon to sleep more than 3 hours between crises. You will. Bran promised, enigmatic smile ghosting. Though not tonight. He gestured toward the Red Keep rooftops. Lanterns spelled patterns. The council in session. Sam stood, joints popping. Duty again. Inside the council chamber, Tyrion slid parchment across polished oak. While you wrestled bears, our Braavosi friends withdrew half the crown's credit line. They worry your reforms outpace revenue. Gendry pounded the table. Steel cells are down. Farmers buy plowshares cast of bronze these days. It's cheaper. His tone grudged pride. The innovation was his, drawn from Rhoynar designs Sam had unearthed. Tyrion pinched his nose. Cheaper, yes, but bronze doesn't prop our banks. We must placate the Iron Bank. They suggest a bonded loan at extortionate terms. Sam scanned the figures, stomach sinking. Interest alone could feed half the Stormlands for a year. We need new revenue streams. His finger brushed a note from Davos. Suggestion of lighthouse levies, modest toll on foreign ships using Westerosi beacons. Sam brightened. What if we tax safety, not grain? Ships from Pentos. Lies. They rely on our new beacons to avoid reef wrecks. Charge a copper per lantern passed. Tyrion's brows shot up. Tariffs disguised as mercy. I like it. Gendry nodded slowly. Copper per lantern is fair. Losing a hull costs fortunes. The council debated until moonrise. They drafted the Maritime Safety Levy Act, pegging revenues to maintenance of beacon towers and healer rafts, a loop of benefit clear to any doubter. Tyrion would ride to Braavos to negotiate, Davos at his side for salt-tongue ballast. As the meeting adjourned, Brienne cornered Sam. A raven from the Riverlands, she murmured. Septon Maribald reports a heretical cult called the Shrouded Seed, preaching that learning poisons earth, that only silence appeases the old gods. They've torched 2 traveling libraries. Sam's shoulders sagged anew. Ignorance spreads faster than ink. He closed weary eyes, conjuring memories of Maester Aemon's candle-lit alcove, where scrolls stacked to rafters, where curiosity thrummed like sea-wit. He owed those memories defense. We'll ride at first light, he decided. But this time, not with soldiers. He opened his eyes, meeting hers. We'll ride with singers, let stories battle silence. News went out, and within a fortnight a caravan assembled. Wagons repurposed into rolling libraries, sides painted with scenes of knights sharing books with orphans, sailors teaching letters to docked children. Marching beside them came bards, flute players from the Reach, shore drum beaters from the Stepstones, skalds from Bear Island slinging stories in booming rhyme. At their head rode Sam, chain gleaming, and beside him Gilly, carrying a satchel of children's primers she had written herself. Simple tales of ravens and wolves who learned to share meat. The Shrouded Seed expected swords, found songs instead. In hamlet after hamlet, the caravan set up tents, offering free bread, warm broth, and readings beneath lanterns, shaped like weirwood leaves. Children flocked first, parents drawn by children's delight, suspicion softened by melody. Brienne sparred good-naturedly with local youths, teaching them stances while reciting lines from the Queen, who cried more salt than sea. Podrick led sing-alongs of a ribald ballad praising turnip farmers, who saved a king from famine. Some Seed adherents slipped among the crowds, preaching ruin. But laughter and knowledge proved contagious. Faced with warmth, many shed their hoods, curious to taste the bread baked by Gilla's oven wagons, or to hear skalds recite Skagosi tales of white bears and brave maesters. Fires of ignorance sputtered for want of fuel. Yet zealots rarely relent quietly. Near Fairmarket, a cloaked figure hurled a clay jar of lamp oil toward Gilly's tent. Brienne intercepted, shield raised. The jar shattered, oil splashing harmlessly on her greaves. Guards seized the attacker, a boy, no more than 15, shaking with terror. Sam took him aside, spoke softly, learned the Seed had promised his starving sisters a loaf for each torch he cast. Sam delivered the boy back to those sisters, arms burdened with real loaves from caravan ovens, along with a sealed writ to the local septon, granting the family exemption from tithe until harvest. The boy's tears washed soot from his cheeks. That night he joined the bards at the bonfire, awkwardly tapping a drum. Word spread. The seeds' promises were ashes. The caravans gave bread. Weeks bled to months. Sam's traveling libraries planted reading circles like seedlings. The shrouded seed withered to fringe whispers, its leaders fleeing north where rumor claimed a sellsword band, named Sons of the Stallion, gathered under crimson banners. Another storm for another day. Autumn found the caravan entering River Run's leafy lanes just as gold leaf skittered the cobbles. Lord Edmure Tully, feasting guests on the terrace, welcomed them with open arms. He donned spectacles to inspect Gilly's primers, and his youngest daughter climbed Sam's lap, eager to practice letters. Under evening lanterns, they dined on trout, glazed with honey and ale. Sam relished the first unhurried conversation in moons. Edmure's wife, Rosalind, played harp, weaving gentle chords beneath talk of beacon codes and river trade. Tyrion, arriving from Bravos triumphant, a modest loan secured at half interest, thanks to the new maritime levy guarantee, raised cups to the Tully's hospitality. Brienne sparred merrily with the Blackfish's grandson in the castle yard, until even the old lord laughed to see blades flash only for sport. That night, well past cockcrow, Sam sat alone on a parapet above the moonlit tumblestone, folio in hand. He had written 30 new pages, proposals for provincial music guilds funding touring bards, guidelines for coastal warning buoys carved in shapes blind fishermen might feel, and a dream of an annual confluence festival, where every craft, creed, and corner of Westeros gather to share harvest, story, and song. A flutter announced a raven alighting upon the rampart. Its seal bore the crowned tree of Winterfell. Sam's throat tightened. He cracked the wax. "Dear Sam," Sansa Stark's graceful hand began, "your caravan's songs reached even our gray walls. Arya writes from Bravos that street children there hum the river refrain. Bran asks that you return when snows fall. He dreams of a library carved in living weirwood root beneath Wintertown. He says only the man who put quills in children's hands can lay its first stone. We have set aside chambers for you and your family. Please come." Sam lifted his gaze to the river, moon rippling. To return north, to build a library grown from heart-tree roots. He felt the awe of a novice facing his first vault of stars. Footsteps sounded. Gilly joined him, wool shawl about her shoulders. "You look torn between sky and stone," she said. He handed her the letter. She read, lips curving. "We should go," she urged. Little Sam's never seen snowflakes bigger than his fists. He smiled, heart swelling. "We will, but first the confluence. One last seed to plant before winter." She squeezed his hand. "Seeds sleep under snow, but they wake." By dawn, Sam drafted invitations, each illuminated with inks Gilly mixed from river mud and summer berries. A tally of 100 letters to lords and fishermen, septas and smiths, to queer folk of Dorne and mute poets of the Vale. He wrote to Isca of Skagos, to the then envoy who spoke only in carved bone tallies, to the sailors' orphans of Old Town slums. The Confluence Festival would convene before the first frost at Maidenpool, where warm currents met cold, a fitting emblem. The months till frosts blurred. Wagons converged on Maidenpool from every spoke of the realm. Tents bloomed across its headlands like bright-petaled flowers. Bakers set up communal ovens, scent of cardamom, mingling with smoke of driftwood fires. Blacksmith forges rang day and night, crafting plowshares and harps alike. Scholars read aloud under awnings, their voices jostling with jugglers' laughter. A Lysine lantern fleet anchored offshore, glass globes bobbing on unseen wires to paint the harbor in shifting prism. Sam walked among the throngs, cloak traded for simple wool tunic, so as not to tower. He listened, a Mirish lens maker debating star courses with a Sisterton fisherman, a Sandornish teen teaching a shy North woman the steps of the serpent dance, Gilly reading her primer while children traced letters in sand with driftwood sticks. At the festival's heart rose a wooden dais where a tall bronze bell sat silent, forged from melted swords surrendered after the last war. Bran arrived, seated in a wicker palanquin borne by companions of the Night's Watch. He asked Sam to strike the bell. Sam mounted the dais, took the rope. He regarded the sea of expectant faces. saw among them Brienne's proud calm, Tyrion's sly grin, Davos' battered humility, Iska's scarred resolve, little Sam riding atop Podrick's shoulders, waving an ivory-toothed talisman. He drew breath. The bell tolled once, deep, resonant, setting the very air to trembling. The sound washed over tents, over the harbor where whales breached, over distant hills where beacon towers answered with blooms of colored flame. Silence reigned a heartbeat, then cheers rose, layer upon layer until they became a living, roaring sea of joy. Sam felt tears blur his gaze. Not all wounds were healed. Storms yet brewed beyond horizons. But for this breath of time the realm remembered itself, not as conqueror and conquered, not as lion and wolf, but as chorus. Night fell. Lanterns ignited in every color. Skagosi bone white, Dornish amber, Tyrell green, Stark silver, Lannister crimson, softened to rose. Musicians from 10 lands met on makeshift stages, improvising harmonies no bard had ever dreamed. Couples danced barefoot. Elders dozed smiling. Children wove between like fireflies. Sam and Gilly walked the shoreline, holding hands. Waves lapped, reflecting lantern constellations. Somewhere a lone flute traced a melody older than the 7. Little Sam ran ahead chasing crabs, laughter ringing. When we reach Winterfell, Gilly murmured leaning into Sam's shoulder, "What stories will you plant there?" "Stories of bear hunters who burn no villages," he answered. "Of songs that quelled fires. Of a boy who grew into a realm because love taught him courage." She laughed soft. "Write them all, Grand Maester." He kissed her brow. Above them the bell tolled again, gently, marking midnight. Around its echo, Sam felt the future unfurl, long and perilous, but seeded with 1,000 lights. He would chase those lights as long as quill met parchment, as long as ravens rode the wind. And when ink one day failed, he trusted another hand, perhaps little Sam's, perhaps a baker's grandchild, perhaps a Skagosi girl, born under the aurora, to lift the quill and write onward, line by shining line, rewriting Westeros as a place where knowledge walked beside valor and bred beside banners, where the gentle knights endured. The tide hushed at their feet, and in its hush Samwell Tarly heard the realm breathe. Steady now, and hopeful. Ken, en. Cold wind curled up from the docks at Maidenpool, rattling canvas and jangling wind chimes made from oyster shells and hammered copper. Samwell Tarly felt the bite of coming winter in his cheeks as he strode along the shore before sunrise, boots crunching on frozen sand. The great Confluence Festival had drawn thousands. Its final bonfire still smoked at the tide's edge, embers glowing where last night's singers and smallfolk had danced in rings, stamping the new year into being. Now the tents stood empty or collapsed, the festival-goers gone to their homes in the far corners of Westeros, their wagons creaking through half-frozen mud. But Sam lingered, packing away the last of Gilla's lesson books, still redolent of honey bread and salt air, while little Sam tugged driftwood into crooked shapes nearby. It was time to return north. He found Brienne of Tarth waiting beside a pale gelding near the main gate, steam curling from the horse's nostrils. Podrick checked harness buckles while Gilly cinched up a woolen cloak around little Sam, who tottered between them in new boots. Davos Seaworth watched from beneath the shadow of his hood, the edge of his mouth creased into a smile. Brienne met Sam's eyes, her own set as sure as a well-forged blade. "The road's clear as far as Duskendale. From there, the White Harbor caravans can take us north. I've sent word ahead. Sansa expects us before the new moon." "Namin?" Sam nodded, feeling a small bloom of warmth. "Thank you, Sir Brienne. And Podrick, there's no knight I'd rather have at my side." Pod grinned, cheeks flushed red as crabaples. "We'll see snow by the time we reach the neck, Grand Maester. That's a promise." Davos clapped Sam's shoulder. "If the North's not lost you to its ice, perhaps it'll let you work one more marvel. I'll ride for White Harbor too. Check in on the grain stores and beacon lights." Then, Gilly mounted the wagon, coaxing little Sam up beside her, and together they set off into the dawn, leaving Maidenpool and the festival's fading glow behind. The journey north spanned weeks, and with every mile the land changed. South of the neck, autumn clung on. Fields yellow and brown, hedges heavy with rosehips, the wind mild and thick with leaf rot. But as the road climbed past Moat Cailin and into the wilds between marshes and White Harbor, winter gathered its first serious teeth. Frost rimed the reeds, the sky steeled to a hard gray. Travelers bundled in wolf pelts and otter furs tramped through the white silence. At White Harbor, Lord Wyman Manderley greeted them in a hall newly restored from the fire scars of war. Long tables overflowed with salted cod, pickled turnips, steaming oatcakes, and apple brandy, more plenty than Sam had seen in many a year. Manderley's laughter shook the rafters as he toasted Sam's health, and pledged half his winter stores for relief convoys to the mountain clans. Yet, there were shadows too, and not all cast by winter's gloom. In the candlelight of Wyman's solar, Sam heard reports of quiet unrest in the woods, small folk vanishing from villages near the Wolfswood, stories of hooded preachers in the market squares warning against the false learning of southern quills. More troubling, several northern holdfasts had ceased sending their children to the new free schools. Brienne spoke with Lady Alice Karstark, newly returned from patrolling her own borders. The old gods stir in the hearts of the lonely places, Alice confided. Or so say the priests who've come out of the woods, calling themselves brothers of the ash. They teach that old blood and old ways must rise again. They burn books, not men, but the fire's catching. Netswa. Sam listened, heart sinking. He remembered the shrouded seed, now withered, yet these brothers of the ash sounded harder, more deeply rooted in the North's own soil. We can't answer them with more banners and edicts, he told Brienne that night as snow fell thick beyond the window. We need to listen. Maybe their fear is real. Maybe we've changed too much too quickly. She nodded. But we can't yield the schools. Not while so many still hunger for what you've brought. No. Sam resolved to write letters in his own hand to every village within 3 days' ride, offering to visit, to speak not only as Grand Maester, but as a friend. Gilly helped him pen them, reminding him to use simple words and plenty of stories. Say you want to listen, Sam, not just teach. So as White Harbor's ships unloaded grain and candles for the deep winter, Sam set out with a tiny company. Brienne and Podrick in the lead, Gilly and little Sam riding behind. Davos heading upriver by boat to monitor the relief routes. They traveled from hamlet to hamlet, setting up tables in cold village squares, pouring cider and passing out oatcakes, reading aloud from the children's books. At first, the villagers came only in ones and twos, faces wary beneath their hoods. But Gilly's smile, Brienne's presence, and Podrick's gentle jokes soon coaxed laughter from the youngest, and the elders, seeing the children's glee, came closer to listen. Sam read the old tales, stories of wise wolves and clever rabbits, of fishermen who taught their craft to strangers, and reaped a better catch. At the end, he always said, "Tell me what you need. Not what the king wants, what you want." And he listened, hour after hour, as the people poured out their grief and hopes. A turning point came in a nameless village by a frozen creek, where a graybeard named Edrin rose after Sam finished reading and spoke. "My grandson wants to learn letters, Grand Maester. But the brothers say it's a sin to read anything but the old prayers. What should I do?" Sam looked at him for a long time, choosing words with care. "If the old prayers are true, they'll stand taller for being shared. And if your grandson learns letters, perhaps he can read the prayers for you when your eyes grow dim. No book written with good intent can harm the gods or a child's soul." Edrin nodded. That night, Sam saw the boy sneaking a primer into the hayloft, lips moving in secret joy. By morning, a handful of parents asked Sam for more books. The Brothers of the Ash did not appear, but Sam left an open letter for them in every village, promising dialogue. Sit at our fire. Break bread. Let us teach and be taught together. Yeah. Some answered in time, hard-eyed but not violent, and Sam listened to their stories, learned their rituals, promised to leave a space for the old prayers in every school. Slowly, suspicion ebbed. Change moved at a crawl, but it moved. Winter deepened as the Tarley party pressed on, the snow growing thick enough to muffle all but the crunch of horses' hooves and the jangle of Brienne's armor. At last, the snowy towers of Winterfell rose from the white expanse, smoke curling from the great chimneys, wolves howling beyond the walls. Sansa herself greeted them in the Godswood, the red leaves shimmering with frost. "You've brought more than letters, Samwell," she said, hugging Gilly and little Sam in turn. "You brought hope, real hope. The small folk speak your name with warmth, and even the old ones argue your stories by the fire." Sam bowed, humbled. "It's your hospitality that welcomes hope, Lady Stark. We're only seeds. The north is the field." He was ushered into the great hall, where Bran waited in his wheeled chair, cloaked in sable. The Starks and their close bannermen sat around a crackling hearth, and the talk was easy and free. Bran looked older, but his eyes remained ageless. "We have begun digging beneath Wintertown, Sam," he said. "The ground is hard, but the masons say the roots of the weirwood reach deep. Will you design the library's heart, as promised?" Sam smiled. "I'd be honored. I'll start tomorrow." The days that followed were among the most peaceful Sam had known. He walked the worksite daily, laying out plans with the masons. Circular rooms grown around the living roots, shelves to hold stories, niches for children to read, hidden spaces for memory. He wrote letters to Old Town, requesting copies of rare tomes, and trained apprentices in bookbinding and ink-making. Gilly and Sansa worked together, organizing lessons for every child in Wintertown, noble and small folk alike, while little Sam played with the Stark children in the snow. Brienne patrolled the grounds, her quiet strength a comfort to all. Even Arya, newly returned from Bravos with wild stories of her own, joined the work crews, teaching knife games and sharing tales of the free cities by lanternlight. Sam listened to Arya's stories in wonder, seeing in her the spirit of the North, untamable, but willing to learn. But not all was ease and warmth. The Brothers of the Ash sent word at last, a challenge to debate Samwell publicly in the square, their leader to speak for the old gods, Sam for the new learning. Sansa and Bran urged caution, but Sam knew he must meet them. "If I can't defend what I've done," he said, "then perhaps I haven't earned it." The debate drew nearly all of Wintertown. The brother was a gaunt man in rough gray, voice deep as a winter well, arguments sharpened on old grievances. "You would make a Southern Grand Maester. You steal the North's soul for coin and clever words. Is there room for faith in your new world?" "Ah!" Sam's answer came slow, deliberate. "I would not steal the North's soul. I would save it. The North endured because it remembered and adapted, not because it stood still. Every story in this library is a thread. Some are old, some new, but all are part of our cloak against the cold. Let the old gods be honored, and let learning make us strong enough to protect all who kneel in the Godswood. Faith and knowledge are roots of the same tree." For a long moment no one spoke. Then Edrin's grandson, his name was Hal, stepped forward and read, in a clear trembling voice, a prayer to the old gods written in the book Sam had given him. The brother's hard face softened. "So long as the tree grows, let its branches bear many leaves," he said, and the crowd murmured assent. That night, Sam sat by the library's unfinished hearth, exhausted and elated. Gilly sat beside him, little Sam asleep in her lap. Arya leaned against the wall, flipping a dagger between her fingers, while Bran watched with his quiet, distant smile. "You've done it, Samwell," Arya said softly. "You've made a place where old and new can meet. Most people wouldn't have bothered." Sam shook his head. "It's never done, Arya. It's only ever beginning again." "And him?" Bran's eyes flickered, as if seeing distant futures. "That's the lesson, Sam. The realm is never finished. It's always rewriting itself." Sam thought of the festival's bell, the lanterns, the faces of children in every village, the stories written, and those still to come. He pressed his hands to the rough stone and whispered a silent promise. To keep writing, to keep listening, to let Westeros shape itself by many hands, not only his own. Years passed, seasons turning. The library beneath Winterfell grew, roots of knowledge tangled with the living weirwood. its halls echoing with children's laughter and the soft murmur of old men reading stories to each other. The Brothers of the Ash became caretakers of the oldest tales, teaching prayers alongside lessons in healing herbs and weather lore. Sam traveled often, back to King's Landing to advise the council, south to Dorne to see new schools rise in the shadow of orange groves, east to Old Town to help reconcile the Citadel's masters with the world outside their walls. Always he returned north, to Gilly and their children, to the snowy heart of the realm. He grew old, white-haired and stooped, but his mind remained quick. On his final night, he sat in the library he had built, watching candles flicker on the spines of 1,000 books, each one a seed, a hope, a promise. Gilly sat beside him, her hair silver now. Little Sam, grown tall and strong, read to a group of children at his feet. Sam smiled, content. He had not ended war, or want, or fear. He had not made the world perfect. But he had given Westeros a chance. A future where stories, knowledge, and kindness mattered as much as swords and banners. Where a boy from Horn Hill could grow to shape the realm's story, and the realm in turn could shape him. As sleep tugged him down, he knew the quill would pass to other hands. The story never finished. But he was content to rest, knowing the future he had written was strong enough to endure, and gentle enough to grow. Okay. The snow fell heavier the following winter, blanketing Winterfell and the low hills beyond, in a silence deeper than any Samwell Tarly had ever known. The days grew so short that dusk bled into dawn without true darkness or light, and all the colors of the world faded to pearl and ash. The people of Wintertown huddled close to the warmth of the new library's hearth, reading and learning by lantern glow, while the wind howled outside, scouring the stone walls with ice. But inside, life persisted with a gentle, growing brightness, a flickering hope that seemed immune to the storms battering the realm. Sam moved among the shelves every morning, lamp in one hand, cane in the other, his chain muffled under layers of wool. He checked each shelf, pausing to smile at children tucked into reading nooks, or to answer the questions of apprentices scribbling away at treatises and maps. He felt the warmth of the place in his bones, the crackling fire, the scent of tallow and parchment, and the faint, living tang of weirwood root growing through the walls. It was not the Red Keep's chill, or the musty closeness of the Citadel's towers. It was a place made for people, not only for books. The mornings began, always, with Gilly brewing a kettle of strong tea and ladling out porridge. The older children helped in the kitchens, the little ones clambered to their studies, and the apprentices hurried to the library's deep workrooms to copy new manuscripts. Sam and Gilly would sit by the hearth, talking softly about the day's lessons, what children struggled with their letters, which crops might need more warmth to survive the snow, what messages had arrived from south or east. Little Sam, now a tall youth with his mother's eyes and his father's kindness, read aloud from a book of riddles to the smaller children, their laughter echoing down the corridors. Each day, the tasks were different, but the heart of the work never changed. The future was being written, one question, one lesson, one meal at a time. That winter, the library became a refuge not only for Wintertown, but for the North as a whole. Caravans from White Harbor brought barrels of pickled fish and crates of dried apples, trading them for copies of herbal treatises and new charts showing the safest passes through the snow-choked woods. Village elders came with their grandsons and daughters, seeking stories and remedies, sometimes offering the legends of their own ancestors to be written down and preserved. Sam welcomed each visitor, copying their tales with his own hand, and adding them to the shelves beside the Maester's lore and the old prayers of the North. The Brothers of the Ash, once so wary, became some of the library's most devoted caretakers. Their leader, who called himself simply Leaf, spent each morning at the weirwood's roots, teaching children to listen to the wind and read the signs of ice and animal. In the afternoons, he joined Sam in the archives, copying the oldest stories and translating them into runes and simple words for those who could not read the southern tongue. Sometimes, on moonless nights, he led the children outside to the Godswood, telling stories by firelight of the first men and the coming of the white wolves. Sam learned from him too and listened closely. In time, the rituals of the old gods and the new learning merged in ways no one could have foreseen. Children blessing their books with a pinch of salt before study, or reciting prayers for safe travel alongside lessons in navigation. The library became not just a storehouse, but a living braid of tradition and invention. But as the winter deepened, so did the challenges. Far to the south, a new pestilence arose. A red cough that swept through Old Town and the river towns, then sent waves of desperate refugees north along the King's Road. Rumors outpaced the sick themselves. That the pestilence was a curse called down by angry gods, or a blight loosed from books, or even the result of old magic stirring in the roots of the world. Maesters and septons argued over the cause. In some towns, panic led to the burning of libraries and the closing of city gates. Word reached Winterfell in the form of a battered, frost-bitten merchant who staggered into the great hall, coughing blood. Sansa called a council that very night. Bran, pale and remote, listened with eyes half-clouded as the castle's elders, the Brothers of the Ash, and the library's healers gathered round Sam for guidance. "We must help those who come north," Sam said quietly, but with steel in his voice. "If we close our gates, we invite famine and rebellion. People will starve or turn to banditry, and the pestilence will not be stopped. But we must be cautious. Separate the sick, and use what we know. Honey for their throats, boiled willow bark for fever, clean water, warm beds, and above all, hope. We have learned how to stop disease before. We can do it again." Benjamin Brienne, still warden of the Norse roads, rode south with a company of guards and healers, setting up way stations along the King's Road, tents for the sick, wagons for the dying, and food for those well enough to travel on. Leif and his brothers joined them, offering old remedies, burning pine resin, mixing herbs into hot wine, chanting prayers to steady the frightened. The worst of the pestilence was contained, though not without loss. Some of the youngest and oldest were buried in the deep snow, mourned by the entire household. Sam wrote letters by the score to the Citadel, the Red Keep, even to distant Bravos, describing what he'd seen, sharing every remedy and every failure. He trained dozens of new healers, from rough-mannered woodsmen to bright-eyed girls who'd never seen the inside of a tower. When his own throat grew hoarse and his head pounded with fever, he let Gilly tend him, and trusted that the work would go on if he failed. But he did not fail. The cough subsided in the north, and the winter, while harsh, became one of shared strength. When the last of the sick had recovered or passed, Sam led a service in the library for the lost, a weaving of the faith's prayers and the old god's silence, and a reading from the Book of the New Spring, the primer that Gilly had written for the children. The people wept and then smiled, and life went on. The next spring came late, but when it came, it was like the opening of a closed fist. Green speared through the snowdrifts, crocuses bloomed along the walls, and the weirwood's red leaves glowed against the pale sky. The library's doors were flung wide, and a festival was declared. A week of games, feasting, and the sharing of stories from every clan, house, and faith. Merchants from as far as Dorne arrived with carts of citrus and spiced wine, and the Starks presided over feasts each night. Sam wandered among the revelers, accepting thanks and blessings, but deflecting praise as always. "This is everyone's work," he insisted. "A realm is never written by one hand, nor does a library stand without every brick and every voice." He watched little Sam, now called Samwise by his friends, win a riddle contest. Watched Gilly organize a cooking contest. Watched Leif teach a dance in the snow that seemed as old as the land itself. He found time to sit with Bran under the weirwood, both of them silent, listening to the hum of voices from the festival. After a while, Bran spoke. "Do you see how the world has changed? You were right, Samwell. Knowledge is a root that will not die, no matter how hard the winter." "Better all." Sam touched the weirwood bark, feeling the pulse beneath it, and nodded. "And so is kindness. I think that's what I learned, more than anything." Bran's eyes grew distant. "There are other winters yet to come. but there will always be spring as well. Will you help me write the next charter? I'd be honored, Sam said. They began that very evening, sketching out a new code for the North, one that blended law and custom, faith and knowledge, in a way no realm had ever attempted. The code set rights for small folk, rules for teaching both old prayers and new lessons, protections for refugees and travelers, and standards for the training of healers and the keeping of libraries in every major holdfast. It was not perfect. No law ever was, but it was alive, meant to change with the world it served. In the years that followed, Sam traveled less. The cold made his bones ache, and his eyesight faded until he relied on apprentices to read and write for him. But his mind remained clear, and his spirit was strong. He became a living legend in the North and beyond, Grand Maester. Friend to wolves and crows, father of healers, and the gentle hand behind the greatest library the world had ever seen. Visitors came from every kingdom and every shore, eager to learn from the halls he had built. He greeted each with the same warmth and humility, always asking, "What story do you bring? What lesson do you wish to share?" Then, when word arrived from King's Landing that Sansa's son had been crowned king in the south, uniting the 7 kingdoms at last under a council of lords and small folk, Sam wept with pride and sent a letter of congratulations. The reply, written in a hand half familiar, half childish, thanked him for teaching the value of both the old and the new. One last winter found Sam at the hearth with Gilly, both of them grayer, but still bright-eyed. Little Sam, now a man grown, had taken over much of the work, and Samwise's children ran through the stacks, learning their letters and their songs. On a night of snow and stars, Sam asked Gilly if she remembered the old days at Castle Black. She smiled and leaned against him. "I remember you saved me, and you never stopped." He shook his head, smiling back. "You saved me too. And the world. Together." They sat in silence, watching the fire, and Sam felt a great peace fill him. The world was not perfect, but it was better for his having lived in it. He had rewritten the future of Westeros not by conquest or decree, but by teaching, listening, and loving, a lesson passed from hand to hand, growing brighter with every generation. When at last Sam closed his eyes, it was with the knowledge that the story would go on, rewritten by all those he had taught to hope. And in the great library beneath Winterfell, the lights burned through the darkness, keeping the long night at bay, and the voices of children carried into the dawn. Years spun past the end of that long winter, marked by slow thaw and bursts of green that seemed to ripple up the valleys overnight. The return of color and trade, and hope to the realm. Spring, that rarest of things in the North, was met as a kind of gentle miracle, a time when people did not hurry, but wandered, hands in one another's, listening for the first birdsong or for the sound of running meltwater in ditches and rills. The library beneath Winterfell grew busier than ever. Now called the Heartroot Library, its reputation stretched from Old Town to Bravos. Its halls open not only to the North's children, but to travelers, scholars, and the curious from every corner of Westeros and beyond. Scribes from Dorne arrived, followed by Rhoynar astronomers with glass tubes and sheaves of star charts. A company of Lyseni inventors, eager to share their designs for water pumps and windmills, traded lessons with the blacksmiths of White Harbor. A gaggle of wildling girls from the true North, wrapped in furs and speaking the rough tongue of the Skagosi, listened in awe as Gilly read from the old tales, and Samwise taught them to write their names. It was a new world blooming, a world that remembered the pain of fire and famine, but turned instead toward bread and healing. Sansa's reign in the south had brought a kind of balance to the realm. Peace was not perfect, and never complete, but justice came more quickly. Cruelty was rarer, and the voices of small folk and strangers mattered more than they ever had. Within these years, Samwell Tarly passed into legend. His death, though expected, was mourned with bells from King's Landing to Last Hearth. And when his body was laid in the crypts, the people of the North and the South alike sent offerings, not only flowers and trinkets, but scrolls of stories, drawings from children, new recipes and herbal cures had inspired. Gilly, her hair all silver, was comforted by family. and by the knowledge that her Sam had left a mark gentler and more enduring than any lord or knight. She continued to oversee the running of the library, working side by side with Samwise, who had inherited his father's quiet, listening way. The first decades after Sam's passing became known as the Blossom Years, a rare and fragile piece in the long history of Westeros. The Heartroot Library's charter, amended and expanded a dozen times, set standards that soon spread across the land. Libraries in every major town, festivals of learning each spring, traveling scholars welcomed in Holdfast and City alike. The old rivalries did not vanish. There were still lords who clung to swords, still arguments and greed and pride. But the stories people told themselves began to shift. Maesters, once only the servants of great houses, became community teachers. The Brothers of the Ash were granted stewardship over local traditions, blending old rituals with new understanding. Healers and midwives trained by Gilly students became as respected as knights. It was a time of invention and exchange. The Beacon Network, grown from Sam's first vision, now spanned the whole realm. Glass mirrors on the hills and cliffs, colored lanterns in city towers, signals running from Old Town to Eastwatch, faster than a raven could fly. Ships from the free cities learned to pay a modest toll for safe passage, and in return, foreign teachers and doctors found welcome in Westerosi towns. Every spring, a grand festival, the Confluence, drew together not only lords and scholars, but shepherds, septons, singers and children, each bringing stories and questions for the council. It was noisy, imperfect, unruly, but it was alive. The biggest change, though, was quieter, woven into daily life. Children of all backgrounds learned their letters, grew up hearing the stories of not only Aegon or Lan the Clever, but of fishers, builders, and healers. Men and women who had saved villages with clever hands and open hearts. It was not only boys who learned to read or girls who learned to sew. Samwise's own daughter, called Rose, became famed for her knowledge of wild herbs and her skill at composing songs in 3 tongues. She traveled the realm as a bard and healer, writing her father's story and adding her own to the shelf. Yet for all this peace, change, and new learning, there were always shadows. One autumn, a letter arrived from the east. Rumors of new unrest in Braavos, of a plague that struck children first and spread like wildfire through the alleys. The council met, debate flaring. Some argued to close the ports. Others, remembering Sam's example, insisted on sending help. Gilly, old now but still sharp-eyed, insisted, "We do not hide from the world's suffering. We meet it. We listen. We heal." So it was decided. Healers sailed for Braavos, with wagons of dried honey, willow bark, and the rare mosses that grew only on northern stones. Rose joined the convoy, leading a company of young scholars and singers, determined to bring not only remedies, but stories and hope. In Braavos, they found a city gripped by fear, but also by longing for comfort, for knowledge, for the gentle hand of compassion. Rose Band set up a tent at the edge of the Ragman's harbor, sharing broth and books, singing lullabies in Braavosi and the tongue of the north. The plague was not stopped overnight. Many still died. But in time, new methods of quarantine and care, drawn from Sam's treatises, slowed the tide. The Braavosi hailed the Westerosi not as conquerors, but as kin. When Rose returned, she brought with her a half-dozen orphan children and a trunk of new stories. Gilly, frail now, welcomed each child with a hug and a place at the kitchen table. The Heartroot Library grew another wing, this one decorated with mosaics in the style of the East, glass and seashell and colored stone, depicting not just kings or warriors, but healers, singers and children reading by candlelight. Across these years, the Starks and their bannermen came often to the library. Arya, now long returned from her wanderings, sometimes sat beside Gilly, reading tales aloud to children. Sansa, now the Elder Queen, sent new books each year, histories, poems, letters from Dorne and Old Town, and even distant Yi. Bran, grown strange and quiet, sometimes sent only cryptic messages, dreams of crows and wolves and green things growing. Hints of dangers beyond the realm that most would never see. But not all was peace. In the far west, a minor lord raised an army of discontented sons and hungry men, blaming the new ways for the loss of old privileges. For the first time in decades, the council at Winterfell debated whether to send soldiers. Samwise, remembering his father's teachings, argued for patience, sending first a delegation of singers, builders, and cooks. Rose herself led the party, armed with nothing more than songs and food. The rebels, tired and hungry, melted away. The ringleader, a bitter man with a ruined farm, was invited to the library. He wept at the sight of his own story written by his wife on the wall of the entryway. Instead of punishment, he was set to work in the gardens, tending beans and berries for the kitchen, and was heard to say, "I never knew there could be room for my kind of story." Such challenges did not end, but each time, the library's way of listening and learning won more hearts than swords or decrees. Decades turned to generations. The elders who had known Samwell passed on, leaving only memories and the stories set down in the library's ever-growing archives. Samwise became an old man himself, white-haired but robust, surrounded by grandchildren and apprentices. Gilly's gentle wisdom lingered in every kitchen and classroom. Her recipe books and children's primers remained among the most popular in the realm. Rose's songs became as famous as the epics of the old bards, and she grew to be known as the singing healer. She journeyed farther than her father or grandfather ever had, sailing as far as the Summer Isles, crossing the narrow sea to Pentos and Volantis, teaching and learning, always returning to the heartroot with new stories and cures. She sent seeds back from every land, and the gardens at Winterfell bloomed with flowers unknown to the north, their colors a living record of her journeys. Even as the world changed, new shadows came. In the distant east, dragons were rumored to fly again, smaller and rarer, but fierce. The council at Winterfell debated whether to fear them or seek them out. Samwise's youngest grandson, Ed, was fascinated by tales of Valyria and dreamed of meeting a dragon one day. He asked, "Grandpapa, do you think dragons could be taught, as we teach children and dogs and horses?" Samwise answered, remembering his own father's open heart, "Anything that lives can learn. But first, we must be willing to learn ourselves." So it was decided. A party would sail east, not to conquer, but to meet the dragon lords as equals, with gifts of song, bread, and the stories of Westeros. Ed went as the youngest envoy, carrying a single book written by Samwell Tarly, a treatise on peace and learning, bound in weirwood and inlaid with the old runes. No one knew what the dragon lords would say, or whether ADD would return. But the people at Winterfell waited, lighting lanterns in the windows and telling stories each night in the library's halls. At last, a raven arrived, a great white bird, wings tipped with gold. The letter it carried was short and formal, written in a language only the oldest scholars could read. But Rose and Ed had taught themselves a dozen tongues, and together with the library's apprentices, they puzzled it out. Peace and curiosity. You are welcome. Bring your songs and your bread. That winter, the east wind carried news of new stories, new friendships, and the first dragons ever seen in the skies above Winterfell, gliding silent and watchful, never attacking, their eyes bright with intelligence. The children marveled, and the library recorded everything, writing a new chapter in the world's long and winding story. It was never perfect. There were always hardships, storms, and quarrels. But the people of the North, and all Westeros, had learned what Samwell Tarly had hoped, that the future was written by many hands, that kindness outlasted cruelty, that every story mattered, and so the Heartroot Library endured. Its walls alive with laughter and song, its hearths warm against the coldest wind, its shelves never empty. In that place, the realm's future was always being rewritten. One question, one hope, one child at a time. It was the 78th year of the Heartroot Charter, and the bitter winter again reigned across the north. Hoar frost feathered the windows of Winterfell, and the library's gardens lay beneath a crust of wind-blown snow. But inside, the heartroot's warmth endured, the ancient weirwood's roots thickening in the shadows, and feeding 1,000 tiny shoots, bright and new and fragile as hope. Candles flickered from the arches, casting gold over a mass of books, scrolls, and children huddled close as wolf pups, reading aloud in a dozen dialects. The world beyond those walls spun on. Kings rising and falling in the south, iron-born fleets contending with storms in the sunset sea, rumors of unrest on distant islands. But the library had become its own sort of world, steadfast and ever-changing, a citadel of learning with roots deeper than stone. The apprentices that day gathered at dawn, drawn from every corner of Westeros and beyond. There were Stormlanders with skin burned nut-brown by sun, wildlings with hair white as snow and braids tangled with beads, summer children from the Isles, even a pair of quiet-eyed Rhoynar twins who had sailed upriver to learn herb lore. Old Samwise presided from his favorite seat near the hearth, his cane across his knees, beard snowy, eyes bright, beneath heavy brows. Rose, his daughter, now grown tall and spare and silver-haired, moved among the scholars, adjusting cloaks, checking on the sick, answering questions, with a gentle authority that recalled her grandmother, Gilly. "We will begin with riddles," Samwise said, his voice scratchy but firm. "For riddles open the mind and bind the heart. Who knows the one about the 3 crows on the wall?" A wildling girl named Lya, smallest of the lot, piped up. "3 crows on the wall, 1 flew away. How many are left?" Rose smiled, leaning on the desk. "Depends who's watching. If you're hungry, you say 2. If you're wise, you say none, for the others will follow. If you're a crow, you say there is always 1 more somewhere out of sight." Samwise clapped his hands, pleased. "Exactly so. It is the lesson of books, too. There is always another story, another voice. Never believe you know the last of anything." Now, as lessons unfolded, the library hummed with life. Children sorted grains by shape and color to learn counting. Apprentices debated the merits of Septon Maribald's journey tales versus the wisdom of the Rhoynar River lords. In a shadowy alcove, 2 Lysini twins mapped the stars onto a curved slate, speaking softly of a new moon they believed hid just beyond the horizon. Rose left the scholars to their debates and climbed the winding stairs to the highest alcove, where light poured from windows cut into the roots themselves. Here she kept her journals, a pile of tattered notebooks and letters that told the stories of her journeys to Bravos, the Summer Isles, the ruins of Valyria, and even the edge of the Bone Mountains. She'd seen cities of glass and towers of shell, dragons gliding over the shivering sea, and markets where 100 languages tangled together, but always she had returned to the north. She settled now with her book, the ink bottle warming in her palm, and began a new entry. This spring, the last of the ice broke on the white knife, and with it came 3 strangers from lands unknown, bearing letters in a script none could read. She described their arrival, ragged, wary, bearing gifts of salted fish and a single polished shell that shimmered with all the colors of the dawn. She wrote of the council that welcomed them, the feast in their honor, the attempts at language stitched together by song and gesture, the realization that the strangers, for all their difference, hungered for stories as much as any child of Westeros. Rose did not know what their presence meant for the realm, not yet. But she felt, as her father had taught her, that listening and learning would always bring the world closer to peace. Elsewhere in the castle, young Edie, Rose's nephew and Samwise's great-grandson, patrolled the corridors. Ed was small for his age, with his mother's dark hair and the easy smile of his Tarly forebears. But his eyes were always searching. He'd been chosen as the next to wear the silver chain, and the responsibility both thrilled and frightened him. He loved the library's quiet, the neat logic of recipes and treatises, the dust and soft paper scent. But he was restless, always dreaming of far-off places. He paused now in the solar, watching the snow drift through the courtyard, thinking of dragons and distant shores. On the table before him sat the ancient book Samwell Tarly had once sent to the Dragon Lords of the East, its pages now worn thin and soft, the words inside faded but strong. Ed ran his finger down the cover, whispering the old promise. Anything that lives can learn. The phrase comforted him. He was still learning what it meant. Suddenly, there came the peal of bells from the main gate. Riders arriving. Ed hurried down, cloak swirling behind him, as a blast of cold air filled the hall. The visitors were not the dragon lords Ed had dreamed of, but a delegation from Sunspear, their leader cloaked in gold and crimson, bearing the sun and spear of Dorn. Their cheeks were windburned, their lips chapped, but their eyes were keen. They bowed to Rose and Samwise, offering scrolls and bundles of saffron, rare herbs and citrus preserved in honey. "We come for the spring confluence," said their leader, a young woman named Sarah, "and to learn what the North has built from its winters. Will you share your gardens, your songs, your ways?" "Nouse." Samwise's voice, cracked with age, still held a note of pride. "You are most welcome. The cold has taught us patience, but also the beauty of sharing warmth." As the sun dropped, more arrived. A Mirish glassblower with crystal rods. A knight of the sisters with books written in waterproof ink, even a quiet company of orphans from the Iron Islands, who looked on the stone fire of Winterfell with wide, uncertain eyes. The great hall was soon crowded with guests, all eager to talk and trade. Samwise oversaw the mingling with delight, telling stories of old Samwell's days on the wall, of Gilly's first lesson in the kitchens, of Rose's wild travels beyond the narrow sea. When night fell, the feast began. Bread and cheese, smoked fish, roasted roots, honey cakes, and great crocks of spiced cider were passed from hand to hand, no seat reserved above another. Each guest brought a tale. Sarah of the thirsty rivers of Dorn, the glassblower of the stars as seen through his finest lens, the sisters' night of shipwreck and rescue. The orphans of the Iron Islands sang, shy at first but strong, a ballad of storms and forgiveness. When the eating was done, Rose stood on the dais and read from the book of Samwell Tarly, her voice carrying over the company. She read the story of the first charter, the promise that learning and kindness could mend more than steel ever could, and as she spoke, the assembly fell silent, warmed by the words and by the sense that they too were part of the tale. Afterward, Ed was sent to escort Sarah and the Mirish glassblower through the library. He explained the workings of the beacon network, showed them the new gardens where summer flowers bloomed alongside winter greens, described the council's system of justice, how each dispute was first heard in story, each party given time to speak their truth. The guests marveled at the roots of the weirwood, thick and alive, and left offerings of saffron and blown glass as thanks. Later that week, Ed found Sarah in the gardens, her hands dusty with loam. She was planting seeds brought from Dorn, careful to nestle each one where the sun might warm it through the day. "Why do you plant them?" he asked, kneeling beside her. She looked at him, her eyes as bright as the flowers she tended. "Because even in winter, something new can grow. I have heard it said, here in the north, that every story is a seed. I would leave something that will bloom when I am gone." Ed considered her words, feeling their truth. He promised himself to tend the seeds she planted, and the stories as well. The weeks of confluence passed quickly. Guests came and went, leaving behind tales, recipes, inventions, and sometimes new disputes to be settled. Samwise grew frail, often napping in the sunlit corners of the library, Rose keeping close watch. One night, as snow fell thick and silent, he called his family to him. The children gathered, Rose at his side, Ed holding his hand, the youngest, tiny Gilly, named for her great-great-grandmother, climbing into his lap. Samwise spoke to them of the long years, of the lessons his father had taught him, of the way knowledge and love must be tended like a garden, pruned and fed and watered with care. "Do not be afraid of change," he whispered, his voice thin. "Stories change, and so must we. The only thing that matters is the kindness we pass on, the truth we listen for." None. He died that night, quiet in his sleep, his hand clasped in Rose. The bells rang the next morning, and all the realm mourned. Guests remained for his memorial, and the library was filled with music and stories, the gardens covered in flowers, summer and winter blooms alike. Rose led the eulogies, reading the riddle of the three crows and telling, for the first time, the story of her father's secret fears and hopes, the doubts that had shaped him, the courage he found in small moments. She spoke of her journeys, of the strangers welcomed, of the dragons that had come in peace, and the seeds planted by friends from faraway lands. Ed read aloud from the oldest book, and Tiny Gilly recited the old prayers in a clear, ringing voice. In the days that followed, the Heartroot Library became busier than ever. Apprentices flocked to the stacks, determined to honor Samwise's memory by tending to the smallest of tasks, mending spines, copying recipes, teaching younger children their letters. Rose oversaw the planting of a new garden in the old man's honor, and Sarah helped set the dorn seeds in their place, swearing to return each spring to see them bloom. Ed, who had feared the weight of the silver chain, found himself now eager to wear it. He walked the halls with confidence, listened to disputes with an open heart, read to children by firelight, and wrote letters to distant cities, promising knowledge not as treasure hoarded, but as bread broken among friends. Each spring, more strangers arrived, drawn by the stories that had grown from the north. From Yeti came a poet with a bag of silk scrolls. From the Summer Isles, a sailor who claimed to have seen islands of singing stone. The descendants of the first Bravosi orphans sent letters, describing the libraries and gardens they'd built in Samwell's image. And in the night, sometimes, the great white raven would return, wings golden in the torchlight. Its arrival was always cause for celebration, for with it came tidings from the dragonlords of the east, and sometimes a new word or riddle or recipe to add to the shelves. Rose, now matriarch of the family, sometimes sat late into the night, reading the letters and the old books, her heart full with memory. She dreamed of the old days, and of days yet to come, her father's words echoing, "Anything that lives can learn." Time was a river, and the Heartroot Library its slow, patient bend. One day, many years after Samwise's passing, Ed stood in the garden, now grown wild with flowers of every color. Northern violets and southern saffron, Yi-Tish lilies, Bravosi bluebells. He watched Tiny Gilly lead a company of children through the beds, teaching them to recognize the shapes of leaves and to taste the sweetness of ripe fruit. He felt, for the first time, that the story of his family and of the library was no longer just his. It belonged to everyone who walked these halls, who read these books, who learned and taught and dared to hope. The world outside would always bring new storms, new winters, new questions. But as long as the candles burned in the Heartroot, as long as children's voices rose in song and laughter, the future would remain unwritten, open, alive. That evening, as dusk gathered and the first stars glittered over Winterfell, Ed sat with Rose beneath the oldest branch of the weirwood and listened to the wind in the leaves, the laughter in the halls. He pressed his hand to the living bark and whispered the old words, as his great-grandfather once had. The story never ends. In the morning, the bells would ring again. New faces would arrive, new stories would be told, new gardens would be planted, and all the children would gather to hear, eager and bright and full of questions, the next page in the long, gentle tale of the library that Samwell Tarly built, and the world it rewrote. No, Injaya. Years unfurled like banners, fluttering bright and ragged through summers of peace and winters of challenge. The Heartroot Library's name became legend. More than a place, it was a promise whispered in the wind. The tales told around its hearths, passed along the traders' roads and by riverboats carried by minstrels and healers, repeated by those who had never glimpsed its red roots, or tasted the honeyed bread of its kitchens. In distant kings' courts, children played Heartroot Library beneath garden trees, acting out stories of wise Samwell, bold Rose, and the countless others who had found purpose beneath the old weirwood. The world outside the north did not remain unchanged. Sansa's peaceful reign gave way at last to her daughter, Queen Lyanna Stark Tully, whose council included smiths from Lannisport, fisherfolk from the Iron Islands, and a Bravosi coinmaster whose own grandfather had been saved by a cup of broth in the old pestilence. The Seven Kingdoms, once fractious and divided, were now linked by more than treaties and oaths, a living web of trade, knowledge, and shared traditions. The councils of the realm increasingly resembled the story circles of Winterfell, every voice weighing in before action, every law passed as a compromise. Never a proclamation. But the old shadows sometimes lengthened. A terrible drought in the Reach threatened famine. Trade wars with Volantis erupted along the narrow sea. Pirates grew bold in the west, testing the beacon's warning lights with fire arrows and iron hooks. One summer, a fever swept from Dorne into the riverlands, and only the rapid dispatch of Hirtro-trained healers, traveling in swift wagons, bearing willow bark and honey, as Sam had once done, saved thousands of lives. Rose's daughter, Mara, spent 3 years wandering the river towns, organizing granaries and teaching the children to read. She sent home each season a bundle of letters, some joyful, some heavy with sorrow, all filled with hope. The greatest test came not from war or weather but from within. A new movement, led by a band of lords who called themselves the Old Order, sought to restore primogeniture and the absolute power of bloodlines. They declared that too much had changed, that the commons had forgotten their place, that libraries had made the world soft and dangerous. They burned a school in Fairmarket, destroyed a beacon tower in the Vale, and scattered the Harvest Festival in Stony Sept with armored riders. The Hartroot Council met beneath the weirwood, the boughs creaking with storm. Ed, now Lord Maester, stood before the gathered crowd. Children, teachers, farmers, lords, wildlings, and foreign guests alike. "We cannot defeat hatred by force alone," he said, his voice carrying in the hush. "The only answer to ignorance is truth. The only answer to cruelty is compassion. We must bear witness. We must not strike back as they would have us do, but stand in the open, holding to our ways, tending the injured and the frightened, and telling our stories so no one can forget what is possible." Maine. Mara, back from the south with her traveling boots caked in river mud, volunteered to lead a caravan into the Reach. She gathered bards, healers, masons, and grain-keepers, each carrying banners with the library's simple sigil, a quill crossed with a sprouting green shoot. They traveled openly, repairing what they could, offering shelter to those fleeing violence, gathering the children for stories in every ruined town square. At first, they were met with suspicion, even stoned in the streets by those taught to fear the new ways. But gradually, as in the old days, song and kindness outlasted hatred. People remembered Sam's lessons. Let the hungry eat, let the frightened speak, let the wounded rest. The Old Order's campaign of violence lost momentum as the harvest failed to come in, and the commons in more and more villages began to refuse their commands. Lord's children, sent to punish the Hartroot rebels, slipped away in the night to read books by candlelight in the wagons. The council at King's Landing denounced the movement, but it was the quiet, daily courage of the library's caravans that made the difference. It took 5 long years, but the Old Order's fires guttered out, replaced by small green shoots of reconciliation, town by town. With peace came a new era of exchange. The Festival of Confluence swelled every spring until the hills around Winterfell could no longer hold the tents and wagons. The city itself grew. New halls for apprentices, glass-roofed greenhouses blooming in the snow, a crescent-shaped amphitheater carved from old quarries where scholars debated not only history and healing, but astronomy, poetry, and the rights of kin and strangers. Mara, returning one spring as the new council convened, found her cousin Lysa orchestrating the festival's opening, a spectacle of music, plays, feasts, and a great lantern-lit parade along the walls. In every event, children of every background led the way. The Reach's firstborn girls reading poems alongside northern orphans, a young Sand from Dorne performing a play in 3 languages, a Tully boy teaching wildlings to swim in the new baths. Rose, though stooped with age, presided over the great hall. She wore a garland of wildflowers, her hands veined but sure as she welcomed each new arrival. A Valaman scholar had brought word of a new comet in the east, and children lined up with ink-stained fingers to sketch its fiery tale in their journals. The old glassblower's grandchild, now master of his craft, unveiled a map of Westeros made entirely of colored panes, each region shining with its own hue, but all part of one light. It was in this great gathering that a stranger arrived, cloaked, silent, his face weathered by salt and wind. He brought with him a book bound in black leather and written in a tongue none in the north could read. When Mara asked why he had come, he answered in slow, careful common. My people have no libraries, but our stories are dying, and the children forget. Will you keep them for us? No, then. Rose, tears shining in her eyes, opened the Heartroot's gates to him, and all who came after. As the decades spun on, the Heartroot Library's scribes became not only keepers of Westerosi stories, but guardians of hundreds of small and fading traditions. Tales and rituals brought by Summer Islanders, mountain clans, wandering Targaryen descendants, survivors of Old Bravos, and New Valyria. Each was recorded and sung, not to erase differences, but to celebrate them. Children came from across the world to learn, and when grown, often returned to their own lands to build small Heartroot houses, refuges of learning and healing in their own words, their own languages. An apprentice from the Stormlands opened a library in the burnt shell of Summerhall. A girl from Skagos, taught by Lysa, created a night school, where wildling children learned letters and the old tales under Aurora's and Wolfsong. The story circle, the tradition of sitting together, sharing not only wisdom but the right to be heard, spread as a model for councils, courts and festivals. Even in distant Lys, where magisters had once scorned foreign ideas, a new law required every city to support a hall where every citizen could speak, debate, and listen without fear. Generations turned. Mara's son, Thomas, became the new Lord Maester of Winterfell, but preferred the title keeper. He was a quiet, thoughtful man who tended to the gardens more than the scrolls, inventing new ways to grow fruit in the snow, and teaching children to write poems about what they saw. Under his care, the Heartroot Library expanded yet again, this time beneath the earth, deep into the roots themselves. The oldest apprentices learned to hear the drip of water and the creak of living wood, understanding the land as their ancestors once had. A great storm battered the north one autumn, flooding rivers and flattening half the greenhouses. For a while, it seemed as if the dream would founder. Yet apprentices and small folk alike worked through the nights, shoring up walls, sharing bread, comforting children frightened by the dark. When the sun returned, Thomas gathered the whole community beneath the weirwood. He reminded them of Samwell's lessons, that every age had its tempests, that what mattered most was holding fast to each other, to knowledge, to kindness. Thomas's own daughter, Isella, grew up wild and brilliant, speaking 3 tongues and riding like a Dothraki. She dreamed of crossing the shivering sea and learning the languages of lost lands, of collecting the stories of distant tribes no map recorded. When she was old enough, she left, promising to send every tale and herb and recipe she found. For years her letters came like seasons, sometimes fat with new stories, sometimes thin and hurried, each one added to the ever-growing archives. And so the story continued, every generation forging the future from their own fears and hopes. The Heartroot endured blizzards and drought, fire and pestilence, joy and loss. It survived not because it was perfect, but because it was open. Its roots tangled with the world, its branches spreading with each new child who entered, each elder who lingered to tell a tale. One summer, as the 100th confluence approached, the hills around Winterfell blossomed with tents and laughter. Old friends and strangers met, languages mingled, and songs echoed far into the twilight. The weirwood's roots, now massive, supported halls of glass and wood, and a bell tower rose above the rooftops, its deep chime summoning all to a new assembly. In the final hour before dusk, the keeper, now a gentle, silver-haired woman named Mari, stood beneath the tree, a great-great-granddaughter of Gilly and Samwell, and called for silence. She recited the oldest riddle, the one about the 3 crows, and the crowd finished the answer together. There is always another story, always another voice. She then called the children forward, one by one, from every corner of the world. Each held a scroll, or a flower, or a memory. Together, they wove these gifts into a great garland, winding it around the roots and the trunks and the pillars of the Heartroot Library. As the sun set, they lit lanterns of every color: northern blue, southern gold, Bravosi green, the red of Old Valyria, the rainbow hues of the Summer Isles, casting light across faces uplifted in hope. The wind, sweet and cold, lifted voices and laughter high. In that moment, for all the world's sorrows and dangers, the Heartroot Library stood unshaken, a beacon to all who hungered for learning, healing, and kindness. And as darkness fell, 1,000 stories began anew, whispered by the children who would one day write the future, as Samwell Tarly had dreamed, in ink and song and deeds of gentle courage.